Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this post-screening discussion uh, regarding Surviving the Silence. Now, most people will have watched the film before they see this. There might be a few who see this before they see the film. So we'll try not to spoil it, as it were, but it's a documentary. So I'll bet a lot of people will be well aware of the major plot lines. Cindy, I want to start with you since you're the filmmaker. What drove you to even begin this film? What attracted you to try to tell this story? Because documentarians have to have a lot of passion because there's not a lot of profit.
Yes, exactly. We're big on passion, that's for sure. What drove me to it was meeting Barb and Pat. I was at Sierra College and I had just screened my first film, Breaking Through, about openly LGBT elected officials. And they came up to me and introduced themselves and started to tell me a little bit about their story. And I thought, wow, there's something here. You know, how does a couple, especially when they have to pretend to not even be together, stay together for over 30 years? And so then I learned a little bit about the backstory behind Colonel Greta Kammermeyer's history, which, you know, I had already known, and put that together. Next night, I showed up at the college with my camera and tripod and started filming and realized, wow, there are so many layers to this that it was just irresistible to me.
Was that before they had that speech where they sort of outed themselves, or was that the occasion where you met them?
That was the occasion where I met them. I'd met them. Let me start that over since you're going to edit.
Okay.
I had met them the previous night, and then I was present the night of their big coming out speech and was able to film it.
Wow. How did you get permission so quickly?
They didn't care, and no one at the college seemed to care. And I think a few other people were filming it as well. And I just happened to be the rude one with the tripod and the camera sticking out on top. And everybody seemed to think that was perfectly normal, which thankfully it was. It is now, at least.
So that's a lesson to a lot of filmmakers. Just jump in and go for it without worrying about whether or not you can get permission. Just show up ready.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Just show up. Be ready.
Colonel Thompson and Barbara, I'd like to ask you about that night. You had clearly no idea that there was going to be a film crew starting a documentary because they didn't even know they were going to do that. Tell me about your feelings going into that night with that speech. Take me to that moment for you too.
Well, I was, of course, nervous. And when I looked out and saw that there were 500 people out there, I just couldn't believe it. And so we just kind of did the best we could. And then, you know, I started and then Barb came out. And so the thing that impressed me the most was afterwards, there were a lot of young women with tears in their eyes saying they were sorry that what we had had to endure and wanted autographs. And I thought, oh my goodness, what do I write? I'd never been asked for an autograph before.
How about you, Barbara? Take me to that moment for you.
I was thinking, and the way it evolved, maybe you'll ask this question later, but the way the whole event evolved was that this was local college gay pride days, and they were looking for a keynote speaker, and they wanted Colonel Kammermeyer, and she wasn't available. So I was thinking, well, why don't we do, even if she had been available, I was hoping that she and her wife Diane would come, and the four of us could be on a panel. And that would be more interesting than just rehashing stories of that people did know or didn't or whatever, but still getting a spouse's viewpoint, because that's really critical when you're in the closet in the military. So they were not available, so we just took it ourselves and spent quite a bit of time preparing this speech and had a lot of slides and a lot of plans for it to go a certain way, and asked that the college record it as well. But we had some screw ups before. And I remember Pat and I backstage waiting to be announced by the president of the college, and things were just falling apart in front of our eyes. They had already started playing our slides when he was speaking and things like that. I mean, we came out there almost thinking, what's going on here? This was not the way we planned it. And it was our first event ever in our lives to do this. But essentially it went really well because Cindy was there and 500 other people were there, and we were able to see that initial first event. And we were hoping that it would be the beginning of us maybe going to other colleges, religious schools, or wherever, community service organizations, anywhere, to share the story, because we felt it was very important.
It was really interesting that your approach for your first event, Colonel Thompson, you included your spouse, your wife, your partner. Oftentimes, we don't always have that luxury of meeting the spouse, the partner, in such a big moment, especially the first moment. What was your thinking where you wanted to try to do this as a united front? What was behind that decision?
Well, I agree with Barb. I think that the spouse has a lot to add to any story like this. And so it's important to me to have her there. So, and we worked together, on our speech, and we kind of went back and forth, and we had help from our friend Susan Goodrich, who helped us write our speech. And so we were ready.
The organizers knew that you were going to come out, as it were, but was it promoted that way? Did the audience know that this was what they were about to witness?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I can't remember how it was promoted, but the professor who organized the whole event, he did know us, and he did promote it, and I think they required everybody in the college to show up that night for our talk. It was part of their curriculum, so we got a full house, I'm sure. But it was the title at the time was "Invisible No More," and then that was the title that we used, because I was invisible. Pat was. I was totally invisible as a spouse, and she was invisible as a lesbian. So we opened that door totally up.
I want to bring Eric in for a moment, if I can, since this was during the time where you were part of the administration. You were the Secretary of the Army. Am I correct? You're on mute, Eric.
In the Obama administration,
yep.
Yes.
So this was during the time that you were. When this news reached you, what was your reaction?
Well, I go all the way back to before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. When I first came to Washington, worked on Capitol Hill, being gay was grounds to be denied a security clearance, which of course is a whole experience that Greta's familiar with. And was in the Pentagon when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was created in the Clinton administration, and then in the Obama administration when it was repealed. When Cindy, who I've known for years, came to me and asked me to be a part of this, to provide some context, and told me the story, I couldn't believe it at first. I had to go research it because I wasn't sure she had it right. It really is, as she said, an unbelievable story. So that's how I learned about it. I obviously followed Greta's case when I first came to Washington, and that was instrumental in me thinking about myself and what I wanted to do. But then when I learned about Pat and Barb's story, it just added a whole other element.
So this was before that you were an openly gay member of the administration, or was this after you came out, as they say?
I came out in the Clinton administration when I was working in the Pentagon. So I was out the whole time in the Obama administration. So by the time I heard this story, actually, I think by the time Cindy reached out to me, we were already into the current administration.
Colonel Kemmermeyer, I want to ask you, you didn't know that Colonel Thompson was a lesbian at the time that she was part of your proceedings. When did you hear about what they had done at this college event? And what was your reaction when you discovered this?
I actually saw it on a rerun on, I think it was Facebook or something. So I saw the speech for the first time, but I had, I think the interesting part for me was I had no idea that she was a lesbian at the time that she was president of the board, and ended up, sort of proclaiming that I was going to lose my federal recognition. And it wasn't until probably a year or so later, when I was giving a university talk at Davis, where after my talk, a short lady came up and handed me her card, and it said Barbara Brast. And on the card also was the name Patsy Thompson. And that was how I found out that Pat was a lesbian. Prior to that, I had no knowledge at all. And so it was hearing their story was, I understand their journey. And now in a place where the Don't Ask, Don't Tell had been repealed, and life was going to be different.
Yeah. Cindy, tell me about sort of organizing the thread of pulling all of these voices together for your film. That must have been, first of all, it must have been really exciting to come up with the idea of who you wanted to highlight. But how did you manage all of that? How did you, as a filmmaker, attack telling this story and unraveling these connective tissues that we see?
For me, the story has always been a love story. And that was our thread, our through thread, if you will, in the film. And so everything else would fall in service to that. And then the secondary thread was the historical nature of Pat's life and Greta's life colliding really in the military, and where their biggest intersection was. And so then that became the second through thread. And after that, it was a matter of refining and refining and refining. And unfortunately, there's some great stuff that landed on the proverbial cutting room floor. And maybe someday we can do something with it. However, I put together the story and I cut it a couple different ways, worked with my editor, worked with my co-writer. And finally, when we felt pretty solid, I had a screening for some folks who are in the business, some who aren't, people who love me enough to tell me the truth. And they were
That's
like,
important, isn't it? To have people who love you enough to tell you the truth when you're making a film.
Yes, because, pats on the back would have gotten us, an okay film, but not the one that we have now. And so that is when we learned that since using a narrator is not my style, we needed someone to connect some of the pieces and parts and explain the things that not everyone would necessarily understand. And then enter Secretary Eric Fanning, who kind of wove all that together for us and helped explain what some of these things meant, not only then, but the current present day application.
I love how you highlighted that he's sort of serving as the narrator without being the narrator.
Yeah.
So, Eric, how do you feel about being a documentary narrator now? Expanding your career.
I do whatever Cindy told me to do. So I was happy to be a part of it. It was really fun to learn about the story, and it's always fun working with Cindy.
It is important that one of the functions that you play in this film is putting things in context in the larger view. So before we begin discussing the larger view now, tell me about what the view was at the moment when these events were occurring, in case someone hasn't watched the film already, just a sort of a primer.
You mean when the board was taking place?
Yes, sir.
The board. So, we've come a long way. When Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being debated, recall Bill Clinton had run on ending the ban on gays in the military, but the opposition was fierce, and not just Republican Party, but uniform military, and including the Democratic Party. The chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee at the time, Sam Nunn, was opposed to repealing. And so they came up with this compromise that was a pretty brutal compromise and created problems for a lot of people for many years. But it was a very anti-gay, homophobic environment. I mean, I was closeted, so they didn't know I was gay. I was a young aide to the Secretary of Defense, sitting in these rooms with the chiefs who were talking in pretty strong language about their strong opposition to letting gays and lesbians into the military.
Colonel Kemmermeyer, this was clearly a very painful period for you, and ultimately you've prevailed, but having to relive this as you talk about it across the country and then find out you have the connection to Colonel Thompson and her wife, Barbara. Tell me about how you have evolved through that process to be so comfortable talking about your story so easily now.
Well, it is after the fact, and it's been a surreal experience. You know, you look back and I mean, even reading my autobiography again, it causes such flashbacks to the time of when I was experiencing it that I don't like to watch the movie. I
Right.
don't like to relive it because it brings up all of those experiences emotionally also. And I think as time has gone on, it's the relevance of not falling back, not accepting that we're going to become second-class citizens again, or going to have to live under tyranny, and the importance now of continuing with voting, with getting politically involved, staying active so that we don't lose our visibility and that we are part of humanity, and that it really is important that we are visible.
And heard. Colonel Thompson and Barbara, I want to ask you, Colonel Kimmelmeyer just talked about that it can be painful to relive, read her own autobiography, go through the story for her from time to time. In the movie, your story, as Cindy said, is a love story. So there's not pain in that, but there are a lot of painful moments in the history of your relationship. Is it painful for you to retell these stories, to relive these stories?
No, I'm sure it's not as painful for me as it is for Greta. But it was one of the most difficult things I ever did, to take her rank, and I cried all the way home that time.
Barbara, I was really moved by some of the stories of your early relationship before this proceeding occurred, where you had to be so guarded in your own home with neighbors and bringing friends to your home. Is that a difficult period to relive, or is it so distant? Tell me about how that feels for you.
Well, no, it's not difficult to relive the parts of the film. When I watch the film and I see Pat, the emotion that comes through, that really comes through in certain parts of the film, and the parts that I've lived through with her, that it's not hard. It's just, it has such an impact on me as well as everybody who sees it. And I understand it, and I've lived through it, and I kind of live through it every time I watch the film.
Yeah.
We've watched it maybe 3 times, and not even enough yet to be able to look at every detail, because there's so much in there. But I feel so good that the pain is showing as well as the joy, because we have both in our lives. Everybody does. And we wanted to share the joy as well. And there's more joy than pain. And I hope it continues that way.
Cindy, how does it make you feel to hear them say that they feel you treated their story to highlight more joy than pain?
Well, it's very gratifying. I am so honored and humbled that people who have changed the world and changed policies at their deepest level entrusted me with their story, and were willing to open their hearts and share these painful moments as well as the joyful moments. And I just reflected on screen what they were telling me, what they were reflecting to me. And you see some painful moments where they tear up, or they get angry, or talk about their separation due to Pat's career. But at the end of the day, this is how they live their lives. I didn't say, oh, I want to have twice as much joy as I do pain. No, it was just simply their lives as they were presenting it, because I wanted them to express their experiences in their own words and simply weave them together to show a broader story.
Film festivals attract younger filmmakers who are beginning their journey as storytellers. And here in Winston-Salem in particular, with that huge school with their big backlot right there, there's a lot of filmmakers who will be tuning in to not just watch your film, but hear what you have to say. So as a filmmaker, how do you advise new filmmakers to do exactly what you just described? get someone to trust you to unfold their story for you if they're working on a documentary?
First, trust yourself.
What do you mean?
Know that you are coming to the film, the documentary, the story with curiosity and open mind and open heart, and be willing to let the story go where it goes. So even in moments where you think, this is not the answer I expected, to know that there's something even more there, that there's a layer, we're going deeper than I thought we were going to go, and be open to all of that and see what unfolds. And that's a big difference, honestly, between doing scripted versus unscripted, because I don't drive where we go if I let the story tell itself. And so for filmmakers, that's the part about trusting yourself. Trust yourself that you will know that your instincts are good, and that you will know when something is grabbing your attention, and listen to that, whether it's suddenly a knot in the stomach or a warmth in your heart, or for me, it's when I get chills, I know, oh, this is really good. Even if I can't put my finger on why it's really good, but that's the time to lean in and just be present. And the second thing would be present, be completely 100% in the moment with the people with whom you're having a conversation. And that's how I tend to set up my interviews, is say, let's just chat.
Yeah.
Make eye contact and be present with them and send love. You know, from my heart to theirs, it's something that I literally do every time in order to make sure that they know this is a safe place, and they can open up and they can let themselves cry, or they can say things they've never said before on camera or talked about publicly, and I will take good care of their story.
Colonel Thompson and Barbara, can you tell me about beginning those interviews when you agreed to be in this documentary, have a documentary made of your love, of your life? What was that beginning of the process like for you, and what made you say yes?
Well, we didn't even think about saying no. We thought, you know, this is just another part of our life that we can do. So we just decided, okay, we'll do this. I mean, it didn't take us very long to make that decision.
I think it was the night Cindy said, "Can I film your, do a story, your story?" But it was so different, so new, so exciting. And in my mind, I was always open for new adventures, and it felt like a very positive adventure. And with the thought that we were going to be out there, hopefully sharing our story more and more, this would be a whole nother aspect of sharing that could go a lot farther than just showing up at a local venue and talking. So it has been worth every minute of everything we've put into it and continue to put into it. And I found a place in that whole arena that fit for me, because I realized that I'm a promoter. That's what I do now. I have promoted the film. I've promoted whatever I feel good about. I've promoted my activist group. If we have a candidate here, I promote them the best I can. So that's really my calling, in a way, on one level.
It's almost in some ways as if your professional roles or your business roles as a couple have swapped a little bit. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I would say yes.
Yeah. Do you enjoy doing these interviews and promoting the film as much as your partner, Colonel Thompson?
I enjoy it a lot. Yeah. And we've done a lot of speaking. I always enjoy that, and the reaction of the audience. It's always good and informative.
Cindy is a fantastic director, and when she asks us to do something, we, I think, have said yes every time. And the last time, it was last week, she said she had sent us a listing of all these different interviews like this and whatever was going on. And I said yes. And then she wrote back, "You mean yes to everything?" So I extracted every yes word from the dictionary and sent it to her. And said, yes, get it, got it, you got it, doing it, of course. If we can't be there, we can't do it. But if we can be there, we will do it. And I think that it's very important to us to continue to be a part of everything.
Colonel Kammermeyer, you received a lot of attention and you had a lot of experience at facing the public in this way for your own story. But you're participating in this as part of someone else's story in the way that what happened to you and your experiences and your struggle and your fight overlapped with someone else's story. Is it different? And if it is different for you in this way, how is it different?
Well, I think my original experience is very different from, so let's go make this public and continue to talk. When my story broke, you just did not talk about being gay or lesbian. It was frowned upon and it was embarrassing. And it was embarrassing to me. And because all I wanted to do was to continue to serve in the military and to change military policy. And when I was contacted through Barwood Studios that Barbra Streisand wanted to talk with me, my attorney and I went down and she said, wouldn't you like to have your life story told to 25 million people on television? And I said, no, not particularly.
Yeah.
And she said, I consider this the most important social issue of the decade. At which point, I, as a person, sort of stepped back and said, well, if this is something that is that important, then I need to help to be the vehicle for that. So for me, coming out, being out, was personally very embarrassing. And it took a while to realize that I was not speaking on behalf of me, but of the thousands who could not speak. And so during those early years, that was really how I dealt with it. Then to loop in with surviving the silence is sort of making a full circle and allowing us to really illustrate how really there are those 6 degrees of separation and how important telling the full story is. And Cindy became the conduit for doing that. So it's been a life's journey, and to still be old and participate is really nice.
Eric, I want to circle back with you. I said that, you were putting it in context for us about what the climate was when these stories were unfolding, when these women were living these rich and meaningful lives. But there are service members who are facing similar struggles now, maybe not the same struggles, but similar struggles now. Tell me about your take on where we're at now, even though you're not in the administration currently.
I am not in the current administration, no. I think this film's important for 2 reasons in terms of this struggle and this fight. One is it shows the sacrifices a couple made so that someone could serve in the military. And ultimately, that very idea is what I think turned Mike Mullen, Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when he said, it's time to end this policy. It's about integrity of the institution. We can't ask someone to hide something so important about themselves in order to serve, because we want them to serve with full integrity as well. And also the individual stories where people come out and tell their story, and as Greta says, be visible, that changes hearts and minds, because this policy change isn't about whether or not gays and lesbians can serve. It's about whether or not the policy reflects the fact that they already are serving. And so whether your story was in the 90s or your story was just a couple of years ago, it makes a difference, because we are still fighting. The end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell didn't mean that everybody came out of the closet who was in the military. There's still a lot of people serving in silence. And of course, there are federal lawsuits to try and protect the right of transgender Americans to serve in uniform, a policy that was implemented in the Obama administration and then repealed in the Trump administration. So we're not done by any means. There are still people serving in silence, and there are still people being denied the right to serve. So these stories make a difference and helping advance for people that are still struggling.
We don't see your coming out story touched on in this film. So let's take a minute to talk about that for you and what was the impact in your career.
This was it was a couple of things. I worked for a workaholic, the first Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration, who I'd also worked for on the Hill. It was a 24/7 existence to work for him. And when he was replaced by the second Secretary of Defense, and I found that I had some extra time in my life, it frees up your mind to think about things that you're repressing. And it just turned out I lived on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and directly across the street from me was a naval aviator and his partner, and that's Tracy Thorne and Mike Beglin, who are still friends to this day. Tracy had a experience a little bit like Greta's. He was discharged before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, reinstated in the military by a federal judge when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was created, and then kicked out of the military again. And I just saw them walking down the street one day holding hands, again, that visibility. And I just realized, well, you know what? I want to be able to live like that too. And so that's why these individual stories really do make a difference, because you just never know when it's going to hit someone or impact someone or give them that courage to do what they want to do.
Cindy, how does that feel to hear that it's not just good filmmaking and good storytelling, but that you have testimony that it impacts people's lives in a much more personal way that people you'll never even meet?
And you spoke earlier on about the passion of a filmmaker, especially a documentary filmmaker, and that's where my passion comes from. Knowing that there's a possibility that art that I create could actually help someone's life be a little bit better, a little bit more authentic, a little bit more loving and joyful. That's why I make the movies that I make. And not only does it honor people like Greta Kammermeyer and Pat Thompson and Barbara Brass, it also encourages others that maybe they could take a step in that direction. Maybe they could look for a way to create a way where there is no way, as the late Congressman John Lewis used to say. And so that's what motivates me. And I love it when we hear from folks that this film in particular has helped them heal some of their wounds from when they were in the military. I hear from people who were kicked out before Don't Ask, Don't Tell and under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and people who were never in the military but can say, you know what, my life was very much like the life of Pat and Barb. I just happened to work for XYZ company. And that's why I think this movie can make all the difference in a lot of people's lives. If they're looking to live just a little bit more authentically, there's a roadmap there.
I know that the film has been making the rounds of the film festivals, and I'm just one in a long line of interviews that most of you are doing. And I'm so glad you could join us too, Eric, because I know you don't join in all of them. I want to ask you, what is the kind of thing you want to be able to say in these interviews that usually for time you don't get a chance to say, or the interviewer doesn't think to ask? Is there something you hope you would get to say? And Colonel Kammermeyer, I'm going to start with you. Is there something in this long line of interviews you do on this topic and about this film that you would hope to be able to say to people who are watching?
Well, I think anyone can make a difference just by living their own truth and allowing that to be.
Can you tell me what you mean by that? I mean, what kind of impact can they have? Or what kind of impact do you feel that you've had?
You know, if you live your truth, you do not know who and how you will impact other people's lives. My grandson, who has lived with us from time to time, ended up supporting his gay buddy in on a sports team. And that boy's mother said that because of his acceptance and standing up for him, that young man did not commit suicide. And, you know, so you don't always know how you can affect someone else's life. But, you know, being an example and living your own truth can influence other people to support their friends along the way.
Colonel Thompson and Barbara, do you want to tell me something that occurs to you that you'd love to be able to say in these kinds of interviews that you're doing across the country for this film that you don't often get a chance to say.
Well, I know that there are a lot of military nurses that can relate to my story. And so I'm pleased that I can be part of this story and to put it out for those who would profit or to be able to enhance their lives from watching our film. So how do you feel?
I'm not sure that I haven't said everything that because I don't really listen to myself. I just kind of start talking. But I feel that what Greta said and what everybody pretty much says is that when we're out, when we come out, when we be who we really are, we have an impact as small or as large as it might be. And every time we have been in any public venue where we've spoken or been around people who know about us, there has always been somebody who has come up and said, and more than one usually, oh, I have a gay son, I have a gay, I have a lesbian, I have a trans, I have a, it's this connection, and they feel able and open to say and share who they know or who they are. And it's opening a door for somebody and putting your hand out there for them and reaching out. And I think that's so significant and important. And it never will get old. It never will get old. It's always going to be something that needs to be done. So whether it's our film or others or whatever television show, whatever is going out there in the world, that if somebody opens a door and shares themselves and puts their hand out, someone will take it and meet it and grab it and hold on, and it will improve their life.
Eric, I know you don't do very many of the interviews for this film because your schedule doesn't permit. So with the blessing of having you join us today, is there something you hope that you would get to say in this kind of interview?
Well, what I would say is what I advise people who approach me about coming out, who are serving in the military, or maybe not even in the military, is it's a natural human tendency as you're thinking through what you're going to do to imagine the worst case scenarios and to approach it with some fear and trepidation. But my experience and that of so many people I know is that there's just this enormous untapped or unknown reservoir of support that can only surround you once they know that you're out. I mean, that was my own experience. Is certainly, I'm sure there were people who were not happy that there was an openly gay Secretary of the Army. But in my own experience, I was just embraced by so many people who wanted to show me that they supported me.
Cindy, your film is more than just a documentary, clearly, for the people who are in it. And I'm sure the feedback that you've received from audiences. What's the thing that you wanted to be able to say in these interviews that they never give you time to say?
I'd like to let artists know, anyone who feels that they want to write or they want to sing or they want to dance or they want to make a movie or in some way express themselves, just start doing it. Much as Eric said, that we find people who are LGBTQ allies that we may not have known were there. We find that also in our art if we will just start. Two of my primary team members on this, my director of photography and editor, Michael Bruno, and my co-writer and camera person, Jesse Freeman, are both two straight white guys who are 10 and 15 years younger than I am. And they brought such talent and such heart and such commitment to telling this story because it moved them. And they want to be a part of this civil rights movement. And this is their contribution to that. And so as artists, it's sometimes hard to say, oh, can I call so-and-so or can I text or email somebody and get them involved in participating? And the answer is most often yes, or maybe, but I need this in order to be able to do that. And so artists of all kinds, reach out. There are people who want to support us in fulfilling our life's purpose. and who want to participate in helping bring something positive into the world, especially right now.
Well, I want to thank you for the gift of your movie, especially the moment where Colonel Kammermeyer and Colonel Thompson and Barb are sort of discovering each other in that meeting that you captured. That was a really lovely moment. And this meeting, bringing me the opportunity to meet all of you and sort of expand on what the movie meant to you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you for your service. And we'll go ahead and let them wind this down so that if they haven't watched this movie already, go ahead and click the next file so that you can watch Surviving the Silence.